She appeared just after sunrise, small, trembling and wild. But it wasn't the spotted coat or those bright amber eyes that stopped me cold. It was the ribbon, a soft green ribbon tied neatly around her neck, and tucked beneath it, folded and creased from the cold, was $40 in cash. At first, I thought she was a stray dog. Then I realized this wasn't a house cat either. This was something in between. A wild thing, a bobcat, still barely a baby, and somehow she'd found her way to the front steps of a man who'd long stopped expecting surprises. No note, no scratch marks on the door. Just the sound of her breath and the quiet trust in her gaze. What happens next? Well, it started with confusion, but soon unraveled into something much deeper, a mystery, a rescue and a story that would reach far beyond our quiet mountain town. I didn't know then that this wild cat baby would open a door not just to my home, but to parts of myself I'd closed for years. So what does a bobcat, $40, and a forgotten porch light have in common? Stick around, because what came after was nothing I could have predicted. I had just finished brewing my morning coffee when I noticed something strange on the porch. At first, it was just a shadow near the steps, still low to the ground like a misplaced garden statue. But when it moved slowly with deliberate, cautious pause, I knew I wasn't imagining it. She was small for a bobcat, barely past kittenhood, though her coat was mottled with the wild, tawny fur, dark markings, those tufted ears that gave her away. Her eyes met mine without blinking. That was the first thing that got me the look. Not fear, not aggression, just a kind of watchful calm, like she had measured me and decided I wasn't a threat. But it wasn't her face that stopped me cold. It was the ribbon. Around her neck, a soft green ribbon frayed at the ends, tied carefully, too carefully for this to be some fluke. Tucked beneath it, a crumpled $40 bill and a scrap of notepaper folded twice. I didn't open the door at first. Just stood there behind the screen blinking at this tiny wild intruder like I was still half asleep. A bobcat with a ribbon and money. Now I've lived in Sagebrush Hollow for 23 years. I've seen moose blocking the trailhead, raccoons curled in my chimney, even a black bear once peeking in through the kitchen window like he wanted a sandwich. But this was new. Eventually I stepped out. She didn't run, just shifted her weight back, tail low, but not tucked. Defensive, not panicked. "Hey there," I said quietly. My voice cracked from disuse. I don't talk much before noon, and certainly not to wild animals. "You lost." I knelt, keeping my movements slow. She tilted her head. There was a little tremble in her back leg. Up close, I could see her better. Her ribs were visible through the fur. Her paws were raw underneath. She hadn't eaten in at least a day, maybe more. Still, she didn't flinch when I reached for the note. The paper was soft, almost fuzzy at the edges from moisture. On it, written in tight, slanted handwriting, "Please help her. Her name is Maple." I didn't know where else to go. No name, no phone number, just those words. I wrapped her gently in a flannel blanket and brought her inside. "My name's Harvey Duncan, by the way. I'm 67, retired carpenter, widowed, no kids, no pets, not anymore. My last dog passed 4 winters ago. I never planned on another animal. I was done with the mess, the worry, the goodbyes, but Maple didn't seem to care about my plans. She didn't move much that first day, just lay on a folded towel near the heat vent while I called every wildlife center within 100 miles. Most didn't answer. It was Sunday. The few that did either told me she had to be surrendered immediately or that I should leave her alone, she'll wander off. I didn't like either answer. She wasn't a threat, not yet. She was a cub, a wildcat baby, but there was something soft in her. Something unfinished, like she hadn't decided what kind of animal she wanted to be. I gave her space, left out some water and a bit of scrambled egg. She didn't eat until after dark when the house was quiet. I watched from the hallway. She sniffed, licked, then devoured it in seconds. Afterward, she looked up at me again with that same quiet alertness. No panic, no fear, just a question. That night I sat at the kitchen table staring at the $40. It wasn't the amount that mattered, it was the gesture. Who leaves $40 and a wild animal on someone's porch? And why me? I've always believed that some things find us when we need them, whether we know it or not. Maple felt like one of those things. I didn't ask for her, didn't go looking, but somehow she ended up at my door. And whoever left her trusted me. I spent the next few hours researching bobcat behavior. Watched animal rescue emotional videos, read forums about orphaned wildlife, and scanned blogs from wildlife rehabbers in Colorado. I learned they can bond early if handled right, but the line between wild and tame is thin. Most states don't allow private citizens to keep bobcats, even babies, without proper certification. Still, I couldn't just turn her loose. So the next morning, I drove her to Cedar Run Wildlife Center, an hour and a half north. I lined a milk crate with towels and set it in the passenger seat. She didn't make a sound the entire drive. Dr. Joanna Whitaker. The vet on duty raised her eyebrows when she saw the ribbon. "You sure this isn't a prank?" I handed her the note and the money. She examined Maple thoroughly. Hydration weight claws, ears, teeth. "About 3 months old," she said. "Thin, but not injured. Somebody's been keeping her alive." "She walked to my porch on her own," I replied. "Then someone taught her to trust people." She glanced at me. "That's good and bad." Dr. Whitaker didn't lecture me. She could tell I wasn't the type to pick up wild animals for fun. She said Maple was in a gray zone, young enough to still adapt to care, too socialized to release immediately. She offered to take her in temporarily while we sorted legal options. But when I moved toward the crate, Maple let out her first sound, a soft, raspy mew. She didn't want to go, so I made a deal. I'd become a temporary caretaker under wildlife observation. They'd check in, I'd report progress, and if things shifted toward release or sanctuary care, we'd reevaluate. She came home with me that night, and this is where things began to change. That first week, Maple barely left the den I made for her in the corner of the living room. She watched me constantly, head-tilted eyes blinking slowly like some ancient creature learning the world anew. Sometimes I'd catch her chasing specks of light across the floor. Other times, she'd stare out the window for hours, unmoving like the trees outside were telling her secrets I couldn't hear. I gave her space. But I also talked to her, told her stories I used to tell my wife. Shared thoughts I hadn't said out loud in years. She never answered, of course, but there's something about animals that listen better than most people ever do. A few days later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside a small bag of kitten food, a fleece blanket, and a hand-drawn picture of Maple Tufts, and all standing in front of a cabin. I flipped the sketch over. "Thank you for not turning her away." Still no name. It made me wonder again who was out there watching from a distance, hoping someone would help the wild thing they couldn't keep. And how desperate must they have been to leave behind a creature they clearly loved. Real-life stories like this aren't as rare as you might think. Across the country, wildlife rescue centers report increasing cases of compassionate abandonment where people find orphaned or injured wild animals, try to help them, then leave them somewhere safe, hoping someone else will do better. It's illegal in most states, risky, dangerous, but sometimes it's the only choice people feel they have. And sometimes it works. Not all rescues are clean. Not all helpers wear uniforms. Sometimes kindness comes wrapped in guilt and survival walks right up to your door, asking for a second chance. I didn't know where this was headed. I didn't even know if Maple would be with me a week later. But I knew this. She came to me for a reason. And whether I was ready or not, she had already changed something. And just when I thought the mystery had settled, someone new began showing up across the road each morning, standing silent, always watching the house. She never waved, never knocked, but she looked at Maple like she knew her. That's when I realized this story was much bigger than me and one bobcat. And the truth, it hadn't even started to unfold yet. It started with a silhouette. Early morning, mid-March. The kind of cold that clings to your skin even after you've gone back inside. I was setting out coffee grounds on the porch railing. Old habit keeps deer from nibbling the rose bush when I noticed her across the road, standing under the old spruce motionless, thin coat hands in her pockets and eyes locked on the house. Or maybe not the house. Maybe Maple. At first I thought she might be a hiker lost off trail. We get a few of those every spring. But the way she lingered didn't feel accidental. She wasn't trying to be seen, but she didn't mind being noticed either. I raised a hand to wave. She stepped back, then turned and walked away without a word. The next morning she was there again. Same place, same posture. Maple had taken to sitting on the windowsill in the mornings, stretching toward the sun like she'd grown up in window glass. Her paws left smudges on the pane. Her tail flicked in slow, wheeping arcs. The woman across the road watched her the whole time. I didn't wave this time. Just watched her watching. She stayed 5 minutes, then left. It became a pattern. 3 days. 4. Always just after sunrise. Always in silence. Until the 5th morning. I crossed the road. I didn't yell. Didn't make a fuss. Just walked up, slow hands in my coat, like I was going to ask for directions or comment on the weather. She startled when I got close like a deer mid-step. Her eyes darted behind me toward the house. "Can I help you with something?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. Not right away, then just barely above a whisper. "Is she okay?" The Bobcat. Her voice was dry, tired, like she hadn't spoken out loud in a while. I nodded. "Her name's Maple. She's doing all right." The woman's shoulders dropped just a little. Her fingers curled into her sleeves. I didn't know where else to bring her. I thought maybe someone kind would live there. She looked so young in that moment, maybe late 20s, but worn thin at the edges. I left the money, she added quickly. I thought it might help. Her name was Jenna. She never gave a last name. I didn't ask. That first real conversation didn't last more than 5 minutes. She wouldn't come closer to the house. Wouldn't accept tea. Just nodded when I spoke, then thanked me for not turning Maple away. Before she left, she said one more thing. I raised her. Kind of. Not on purpose. And then she was gone. That sentence stuck with me all day. Not on purpose. Later that evening, I sat with Maple curled at my feet and tried to make sense of it. You don't just accidentally raise a wild animal. Not unless you're desperate. Not unless the world's already turned its back on you. Over the next week, Jenna came back a few more times. Not every day, but often enough that I started leaving a mug of coffee on the porch rail, no questions, no pressure. Some mornings it was gone. Others it stayed. Finally, she agreed to sit on the porch. She never looked me in the eye when she talked, but the words came slowly. Bit by bit, like someone unfolding a letter they weren't sure they wanted you to read. She'd found Maple, then barely a week old, bleeding and mewling near the edge of a logging trail. She thought she was a stray cat. Took her in, fed her bits of canned tuna and formula from a dropper. By the time she realized Maple wasn't domesticated, it was too late. I didn't mean to keep her, she said, but it felt wrong to let her die. Jenna had been living out of her car that winter. No job, no address, just a duffel bag, a few drawings folded in a sketchbook, and a heater that worked half the time. She kept Maple in a blanket-lined box beside her sleeping bag. Talked to her like a friend. Called her my little fox cat. I think she kept me warm more than the other way around, she said, brushing at her sleeve. But then she got too big, too wild. I knew I couldn't protect her anymore. So she drove north. Stopped at the first house with a porch light on. Left her at my door with the money and the note. Then drove away before she could change her mind. Real stories like Jenna's don't always show up in documentaries or rescue videos, but they happen more often than we know. People don't always abandon animals because they're cruel. Sometimes they do it because it's the only form of love they have left. When you've lost your home, your safety, your dignity, a ribbon and $40 might be the last way you know how to say I tried. I told her that Maple was safe. That she slept by the heater vent now, that she liked eggs and watching snow melt through the window. Jenna smiled barely. She always liked light. She still wouldn't come inside, said she didn't belong in warm places anymore. But I started leaving out food, warm socks, little kindnesses. I didn't mention them. She didn't thank me. But some mornings they were gone. Sometimes that's all the proof you need. A week later, I found something under the doormat. A sketch. Torn notebook paper. Smudged pencil. It was Maple drawn with messy lines but undeniable. Curled up on the windowsill, sun beaming across her back. Underneath, in tiny letters, "She belongs to the light now." I pinned it above my desk. There's a strange grace in knowing you are someone's last safe place. Jenna didn't leave Sagebrush Hollow. Not yet. She'd found a temporary job cleaning at the hardware store. Stayed in a trailer behind the old Baptist church. She started drawing again. Never said much, but the colors on her sleeves got brighter. The lines in her sketches are steadier. She never asked for Maple back. Never hinted. Just came sometimes to sit on the porch. Maple would press her paws against the window, and for a moment they'd just stare at each other. No words, no blame, just understanding. There's a case out of Oregon. A woman named Tessa found a raccoon cub on her property after a flood. Raised him secretly in her shed. When authorities found out, they were ready to press charges. But once they heard her story, domestic abuse, trauma, isolation, they helped her place him with a sanctuary instead. Later, she became a volunteer there. Ended up working full-time with wildlife rescue. Sometimes compassion begins as desperation, and that doesn't make it any less real. We don't always get to finish the stories we start, but sometimes the best thing we can do is hand the story off to someone else who can keep it going. And that's its own kind of love. Jenna didn't abandon Maple. She trusted that someone might still show up in the world. And sometimes that's all the hope a person can afford. Maple began sleeping on the porch window ledge more often after that, like she was waiting, or maybe remembering. I don't know. But I do know this: she wasn't the only one learning to trust again. Wild animals have a way of reflecting things at us. When you look into their eyes, it's not about taming them, it's about recognizing the part of yourself that still believes in connection, even when the world teaches you to stop trying. Maple reminded me and Jenna that soft isn't weak, and wild doesn't mean broken. If you've ever let go of something with trembling hands, hoping it would land in kindness, maybe this story is yours too. I thought that was the end of it, that Jenna's chapter in Maple's life had quietly closed. But then, on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, a boy stood there, backpack hanging off one shoulder, holding a photo of a bobcat in a paper frame. "I think that used to be my cat," he said. Her name was Willow. Or maybe Maple now. It was the kind of gray afternoon where the clouds hang low, like they're unsure if they want to rain or just remind you of everything you've forgotten to do. I was sweeping pine needles off the porch when I heard it. A knock. Not loud, not urgent, just precise, like someone had practiced. When I opened the door, he was standing there, thin jacket too big, scuffed sneakers, a backpack hanging off one shoulder like he'd been walking a while, and in his hands a folded piece of cardboard, edges bent, holding a photo of a small bobcat cub curled up on what looked like a pile of laundry. "I think that used to be my cat," he said softly. "Her name was Willow. Or maybe Maple now." I blinked at him. He was maybe 12. Dark hair, wide eyes, the kind of face that still believed in good things, even if the world had tried to change that. Maple must have heard his voice. From the hallway she appeared, her steps slow, cautious, but curious. She padded forward until she reached the door frame, then stopped. The boy dropped to his knees. Maple blinked once, then walked straight toward him. She pressed her nose against his hand. A small, familiar chirp left her throat, one she hadn't used with me before. He didn't cry, but something in his shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "I called her Willow," he said again. "But it's okay if she's Maple now." His name was Miles. He and his sister had lived in a small rental just outside the national forest. Their parents had been gone for some time. He didn't say why, and I didn't press. It was just the two of them, scraping by, trying to keep things together. One afternoon, Miles had come home from school and found the front door padlocked. An eviction notice fluttered on the frame. His sister had packed what she could into a duffel bag, told him they had to go right then. There wasn't time for anything else. She told me I had to leave Willow, he said, looking down at the floor. But I couldn't just let her go into the woods. So I wrapped the money we had in a napkin, wrote a note, and found a house with a porch light still on. He looked up. I hoped someone kind would open the door. We sat at the kitchen table, Maple curled at his feet, dozing like she'd never left, and talked. It wasn't a long story, but it didn't need to be. The world had asked too much of him, and still he had found a way to let go with love. I told him the truth that Maple had changed the rhythm of my home, that her quiet presence had cracked something open in me I didn't know still needed healing. That was because of her people had shown up. Jenna, letters, sketches, conversations I hadn't had in years. He smiled at that. She always made the world feel like a smaller place, he said. Like you didn't have to be alone if she was near. In Arizona, a boy named Leland once rescued a fox kit and kept it hidden in an old playhouse for 3 weeks before surrendering it to a rescue center. When questioned why he waited so long, he simply said, "Because it was the only thing that listened when I talked." Later, the center named the fox Leland in his honor. Today, that same boy volunteers with wildlife rehabilitation. There's something powerful about how children see animals not as trophies or threats, but as friends, as quiet, unjudging witnesses to whatever storm they're going through. I made Miles a sandwich, packed him a few supplies, some of Maple's food, a warm sweater I hadn't worn in years. He tried to refuse it. "You've already done enough," he said, but I handed it over anyway. "If you ever want to visit," I told him, "you can." He paused at the door, his fingers brushing the worn wood. Then he looked back. "Can I come tomorrow?" And so he did. The next day. And the next. Always after school, always carrying the same canvas tote with a half-zipped pencil case and a spiral sketchbook covered in doodles. Maple would perk up the second his boots hit the porch. By the time I opened the door, she was already at the entryway, tail flicking with something between joy and recognition. Miles never asked to stay, never hinted. But every afternoon he stayed a little longer. By the end of the week, he was helping me with the garden, watering the sage, chasing Maple out of the mint bed, laughing when she tried to hunt the hose. He showed me his drawings, dozens of them. Some simple, just outlines of Maple in motion, others more tender. One of her curled in a sunbeam with a crown of wildflowers. Another where she stood on a mountaintop silhouetted against a watercolor sky. "You've got an eye for movement," I told him. He shrugged. "She makes it easy. There's a kind of healing that doesn't come from advice or books or even kindness. It comes from being seen, truly seen by someone or something that expects nothing from you but your presence." That was Maple for Miles. And slowly Miles for me. Letting go is hard. But sometimes when we do something unexpected happens, it finds its way back. Not always in the way we expect, not always as ours, but as something new, something shared. Maple wasn't mine. Not fully. And not his either. She belonged to all the spaces she had filled. All the people who had trusted her to bring light where there wasn't any. One day, while we were reorganizing an old bookshelf, Miles found the original note he had written. I hadn't realized I still had it tucked behind a flower-pressed bookmark in a field guide. He held it gently like a photograph from a life he no longer lived. "I thought I'd never see her again," he whispered. He didn't cry, but his voice cracked. Just once. And I knew what it meant. Sometimes animals save us in ways we don't understand until much later. People talk about rescue animals, but we rarely talk about how often they rescue us. Not just from danger, but from loneliness, from the kind of silence that gets louder the longer you sit with it, from forgetting who we were before the world asked us to be strong all the time. Maple had become a bridge, not just between Miles and me, but between memories we couldn't carry alone anymore. That Saturday, I cleared out the guest room. Hung a few of Miles's sketches, found an old lamp, laid out clean sheets. He moved in that evening. No drama, no declarations, just a kid with a bag and a bobcat who already knew where her spot was. A week later, I took a photo. Maple on the windowsill. Miles is reading beside her, light spilling in like something sacred. I printed it, framed it, hung it by the door. And every time I passed it, I was reminded some things return, not to stay the same, but to help us grow into something better. Have you ever let go of something only to find it again in a way that changed you? I thought the story had settled, that the mystery had played its part, and now it was just life again. Quiet, gentle, with two beings and a boy finding their rhythm. But then Miles showed me something, a page from his sketchbook. Not a drawing, a letter. To the girl who left her, it read, "I hope you're okay." He hadn't forgotten Jenna, and neither had Maple. And just like that, the next part of the story started knocking again. It started with a mess of broken shelves and a half-lit bulb that buzzed when the wind hit the window wrong. The old shed out back had been my tool workshop once. For years it sat quiet, gathering sawdust and forgotten bolts, like a place that once meant something but didn't anymore. I hadn't stepped inside in over 2 winters. But on a quiet Tuesday, Miles came in with his sketchbook tucked under one arm and said, "I need more space." That was all it took. We cleaned it out the next day, shoved old crates aside, swept until the corners stopped coughing up cobwebs, found old paint cans that had hardened like rock. Miles pulled nails from the wall one by one, while Maple sat in the doorway blinking like a supervisor on break. We didn't say much. Just moved steady and focused, like we were clearing space for something bigger than either of us could name. By sunset, it looked less like a shed and more like possibility. We called it the studio, not because it was fancy or official, but because it felt like the kind of place where stories could be made real. We strung up a single row of warm lights from corner to corner, hung clips for sketches, bought in a second-hand desk someone in town was giving away. I donated my old drafting stool, which creaked like a song when you turned too fast. Miles spent every afternoon in there, sometimes drawing Maple mid-pounce, mid-yawn, mid-chirp. Sometimes just sitting quietly with a pencil in hand, eyes out the window, waiting. And slowly things started appearing on the walls. Maple in a crown, Maple curled in a nest of stars, Maple sitting with a boy and a woman, the lines rough but tender. When I asked about that one, he only said, "I remember her eyes." A few days later, Jenna came back. I hadn't seen her in weeks. Not since that last porch conversation when she said she wasn't made for warm places anymore. But this time, she knocked. Miles opened the door. They just looked at each other. No hug, no tears. But something passed between them. Recognition, forgiveness. Maybe more than that. I saw the drawing, she said. "I wasn't sure you'd still remember. I didn't forget anything," he said. "I just didn't know how to say it." She stayed for dinner. Quiet, soft-spoken, ate slowly like someone not used to being invited to tables. Maple curled around her ankles halfway through the meal and didn't leave. And by the time the plates were cleared, Jenna asked if she could see the studio. That night she left with a box of unused charcoal and a scrap of canvas tucked under her arm. The next morning, she came back with 2 sketches. One was of Maple watching snow fall. The other was of Miles, asleep in a chair, pencil still in hand, a bobcat curled against his legs like a question mark. From then on, the studio became theirs. Miles and Jenna. Side by side, sometimes silent, sometimes humming. Their pencils moved in different rhythms, but somehow always found the same beat. I watched from the porch most days, tea in hand, listening to the sound of healing without words. In Montana, a retired firefighter named Glenn lost his wife and then months later rescued a stray coyote pup stuck in a fence behind his barn. While rehabbing the pup, he started sketching again, something he hadn't done since high school. A local art teacher caught wind of it and invited him to co-host a drawing workshop. Today, Glenn leads a wildlife sketch group for veterans, many of whom say it's the first time they've felt peace in years. Creativity isn't about making something perfect. It's about making space for your story, your grief, your wild memories. Miles didn't draw to impress. Jenna didn't paint to escape. They were telling the truth in lines and shadows, and sometimes that's the only way we know how. The townsfolk started noticing. It began with Dean from the diner asking if Miles could draw a birthday card for his granddaughter. Then Miss Keller from the library asked for a sketch of her cat Daisy, who had passed that fall. We hung their requests in the studio window. One by one, people started leaving notes. Small things, a photo, a name, a thank you scribbled on a napkin. Eventually, the town's paper ran a short piece, Boy and Bobcat inspire local art space in Hollow. Underneath it, a photo of Miles smiling beside Maple, who looked half bored and entirely royal. The next day, someone slid an envelope under the studio door. Inside was a photo of a man holding a gray kitten in a workshop with the caption, "I saw your story. Found this little one in a box outside the hardware store. Figured I'd try." No name, just that. We pinned it to the wall. Soon others followed. Letters, sketches, stories. One woman sent a watercolor of a golden retriever who had passed with the note, "Thank you for reminding me that their love stays." The wall kept growing. We started calling it the Hope Wall. People want to tell their stories. They just don't always know where they're allowed to. Sometimes all it takes is a wall, a pencil, and the feeling that someone is listening. Jenna found her rhythm again. Started teaching a few kids from town how to shade fur, how to draw emotion in animal eyes. She never called herself an artist, just said, "I used to draw," when the world felt loud. Miles created a whole series of comic panels called Maple in the Wild. One showed Maple teaching squirrels how to paint. Another had her wearing a detective hat, solving crimes of lost socks and empty food bowls. We printed some and sold them at the corner market. Used the money to buy more paper, more pencils, more space, and Maple. She just kept showing up, sleeping on the bench, pawing at paper, knocking over coffee mugs like it was her full-time job. She was still a wild thing. That never changed. But she had become something more than that, too. She was the reason the studio existed. The reason Jenna and Miles kept coming back to Wask. The reason the porch lights stayed on, even on the coldest nights. Sometimes healing doesn't start with a breakthrough. It starts with a table, a wall, a paw print on your sketchbook. We think it has to be loud, dramatic, but often it's just this: a boy, a woman, a bobcat, and a quiet place in the woods where the world starts to feel safe again. One afternoon, as the snow melted off the roof and lights spilled across the desk, Jenna asked a question I hadn't expected. "What if we opened it up?" "The studio?" I asked. "Yeah, just one weekend. Invite people in, show them what it's become." I looked at Miles. He was already nodding. "I can make a flyer," he said. "Maybe draw Maple in a beret." Jenna laughed for the first time in weeks. And just like that, we had a plan. Have you ever made a space just for feeling, for healing? What would yours look like? The flyer went up at the post office the next day. Just a sketch of Maple holding a paintbrush in her mouth and the words, "Come see what kindness creates." We didn't expect much. But on Saturday morning, the porch was full. And what happened next was more than an art show. It was the beginning of a ripple that reached far beyond the trees. The first open house at the studio wasn't flashy. We didn't have signs with glitter or rows of tables filled with merchandise. There was no music, no speeches, no fanfare. Just a few folding chairs, a tray of oatmeal cookies Jenna made that morning, and Maple curled up on the front bench, her ears flicking lazily like she'd seen it all before. The flyer Miles had designed was taped to the mailbox and pinned to the board at the post office, just a simple sketch of Maple holding a paintbrush in her mouth, and the words, "Come see what kindness creates." That Saturday morning, I half expected nobody to show up. But by 10 o'clock, the first couple walked up the gravel path, Tom and Diane, long-time locals, holding hands like teenagers. Diane carried a dog-eared folder of old pet photos. Tom brought a bag of birdseed for Maple's squirrel friends, he said with a grin. An hour later, the porch was full. People came in slowly at first, then in twos and threes. Some brought drawings, others brought letters. One woman came with a small tin box and quietly set it on the studio windowsill. Inside a collar, a worn tennis ball, and a note that read, "His name was Buck." He made me laugh when I forgot how. We didn't ask questions, we just made room. Miles stood near the Hope wall, answering questions about his comics. Jenna offered paper and pencils for anyone who wanted to draw. One little girl sketched Maple in a cape and said she was a Wildcat superhero. Her grandfather wrote on the back. First time she's picked up a pencil since her mom passed. We hung that one too. The magic wasn't in what people brought, it was in what they left behind. Stories, so many stories. A firefighter who lost his partner and found comfort in rescuing an old dog with one eye. A retired teacher who began sketching wildlife again after 20 years because she saw herself in a bobcat drawing online. A teenage boy who had never spoken in public until he stood up during our open circle and said, "I thought I was the only one who missed someone that wasn't a person." There's a small art center in Vermont called Heartspace that began after one woman lost her dog and painted a portrait as a way to say goodbye. She posted it in her window. A neighbor left a note, then another. By the end of the month, her porch had over 50 letters and pictures. That porch became a gallery. That gallery became a gathering place. Today, Heartspace hosts monthly pet memory nights where people come not to mourn but to remember together. That's what our studio was becoming, not a rescue shelter, not an art school, just a place where grief was welcome, and where love, wild, quiet, loyal love had room to stretch out and stay a while. One of the most unexpected visitors that day was Miss Keller from the library. She stayed the whole afternoon, mostly quiet, sipping tea in the corner with her eyes on the Hope wall. Before she left, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a single sentence: "I haven't smiled since Daisy died." Until today, underneath a drawing of a cat in the rain sitting in a window looking out. We framed it, put it right by the door. Sometimes it's not about fixing someone or giving them answers. It's just about giving them somewhere to go with their feelings. A porch, a wall, a page. Some place they don't have to explain the depth of what they lost or why it still stings on a sunny morning 5 years later. That kind of space, it ripples, far more than we see. In the weeks that followed, the ripple widened. Someone wrote about the open house on their community Facebook group. Another posted pictures of the Hope wall. Then came emails from nearby towns and then states away. People wanted to send letters. Some wanted to donate art supplies. One woman from Kansas asked if she could mail a watercolor portrait of her late bobcat named Whiskey. Another from Oregon wrote, "I lost both my parents this year, but your studio gave me something I hadn't felt in a while. Permission to still believe in sweetness." We read her letter out loud during studio hours. Jenna cried. Miles folded it and pinned it next to the window where the light always hit just right. And Maple, she became a quiet celebrity. We never pushed her forward, but somehow she was always in the right place, sprawled on a sketchbook, perched near a guest who needed quiet company, or sitting at the door just long enough for someone to whisper, "There she is." Someone once called her the ambassador of softness. We agreed. It's easy to assume that animal rescue is about saving them, but sometimes they're the ones doing the saving. Not with heroics, but with presence. With the way they look at you like you matter, even when you haven't spoken in days. With the way they stay. Quiet, unbothered, completely real. Maple didn't fix anything. She just showed up, and that, somehow, was enough. One afternoon, we received a box with no return address. Inside, a small collection of hand-sewn catnip toys, a child's drawing of a bobcat with a crown, and a card that read, "Your story made it to Maine. This is for whoever needs to smile next." We added it to the wall. Miles called it the kindness thread, a name that stuck. By now, the Hope wall had grown beyond the window. It stretched across the back corner, then onto the east wall. We added corkboards. Miles mapped where the letters came from with little colored pins and red thread connecting the cities. Colorado, Ohio, New Mexico. Tennessee. Jenna called it a web of gentle things, and I couldn't have said it better. Every week, someone new arrived. Not always with art, sometimes just to stand there, to touch a letter, to nod quietly and say, "I know this feeling." Sometimes that's all it took. A man in his 60s came on a rainy Thursday, said he wasn't much for talking, just looked around for a long time. Before he left, he placed a photo of a cat beside the guest book. She used to sit at the window like that, he said, pointing to Maple. Even after the chemo started. He didn't leave a name, just walked back into the rain. But his photo stayed. Maple in the window, his cat on the floor, a mirror from one life to another. Stories don't end when the last page turns. They echo. Through drawings, through letters, through soft-eyed bobcats curled on porch steps. And when we share them openly without expectation, they ripple further than we'll ever know. If a moment from your life could live on someone else's wall and help them breathe a little easier, what would you share? We didn't know it yet, but the ripple had reached someone else. Someone with a badge. Someone who asked the one question I'd been avoiding. Do you have a license to keep a wild animal? And just like that, we were no longer just artists in the woods. We were about to find out what it meant to fight for the right to care. The call came just after lunch. I was clearing mugs from the studio table. One of Maple's tails had just swiped a watercolor palette onto the floor when the landline rang. Only a few people still used it. Most days it was silence. This time it was the Cedar Run Wildlife Shelter, the same center where I'd first taken Maple months ago. The same center that had said back then that she was a gray zone. Too wild to be a pet, too young to survive alone. Now they wanted to revisit her case. That's how they phrased it. Revisit, like reopening an old wound. I knew this might happen. From the moment I brought her home, I knew. Bobcats aren't house pets, even baby bobcats. Especially not ones with claws sharp enough to tear screen doors or instincts that wake at midnight. She had grown since that first cold morning on the porch. Her legs are stronger, her pounce is more precise, her gaze was wilder somehow, less hesitant, less tame. Still, she chose to stay. She followed me from room to room like she belonged, curled on Miles's lap like she trusted him, waited for Jenna by the window, flicking her tail the moment she turned into the driveway. She wasn't just a wild animal anymore. She was family. The shelter rep's voice was kind, but firm. There are state guidelines, Mr. Duncan. You know that. Bobcats are protected wildlife. Keeping one long-term, even with good intent, requires a proper license. We're not accusing you of wrongdoing, but we do need to assess the situation. They scheduled a visit for the following week, said it would be routine, said it might result in her being placed in a licensed sanctuary or return to their care for rehabilitation and eventual release. I nodded through the phone, thanked them, hung up, then sat on the edge of the porch and stared into the trees for a long, long time. Miles noticed first. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Maple was curled beside him, blinking in the sun. I didn't answer right away, just watched her, watched them. The boy who'd once left her with a ribbon and $40. And the cat who had crossed so many thresholds, feral to family, abandoned to adored. "She might have to leave," I said finally. "They're checking on her." Miles didn't speak, but he pulled Maple a little closer like she might disappear in the silence. We told Jenna that night. She didn't get angry. She just sat with her elbows on the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, and said, "They'll never see her the way we do." And she was right. To the world, Maple was a wild cat. A protected species, a potential risk. To us, she was the thread that had stitched this family together. Over the next few days, we prepared, just in case. Miles printed out all his Maple sketches. Jenna gathered letters from the Hope Wall stories of healing, of joy, of rescue animals that had changed people's lives. I wrote a statement straight from the heart, explaining how this bobcat had not only chosen to stay, but had helped others stay too. Stay present, stay hopeful, stay soft. We included everything. Photos, visitor logs, letters from neighbors, teachers, even the mayor who had once called Maple a blessing in stripes. And then we waited. In North Carolina, a man named Thomas rescued a red fox cub injured on the roadside. He raised her for 5 months before authorities were alerted. They were ready to fine him. But after reviewing his case and with testimony from his local community, he was granted a provisional wildlife ambassador license. That fox now visits schools with Thomas to teach children about conservation. What started as a technical violation became a teaching opportunity because people saw intention, not just regulation. The shelter visit was quiet. A woman named Tessa, mid-40s, polite but cautious, arrived with a clipboard and a soft voice. She asked about Maple's diet, her sleeping habits, her behavior with strangers. Maple, for her part, was unusually calm. She perched on the windowsill as if proving she could be both wild and watchful, present and untamed. Tessa asked to see the studio. We walked her through the Hope Wall, the art, the letters. She read one out loud slowly, almost reverently. It was from a woman in Nevada who had lost her son and adopted a rescue kitten after seeing Maple's story online. I hadn't spoken in weeks, the letter said, but I whispered to him, and he listened. Tessa folded it gently. Then she asked the question, "If we can't grant you a license, what would you do?" I looked at her, then at Miles, who was standing by the studio door, hands clenched in his sleeves, and Jenna, who was silent but solid like she always was when things mattered most. And then I looked at Maple. She wasn't trying to run. She wasn't panicked. She just blinked slowly like she trusted we'd figure it out. "I'd let her go," I said, "because I won't teach her fear, not now. But I'll fight for the chance to do this right." Tessa nodded once, didn't smile, didn't frown, just closed her notebook and said, "We'll be in touch." The waiting that followed was worse than the visit itself. Every day felt like it could be the last morning Maple would watch the sun stretch across the porch floor. We kept things normal tea-drawing studio hours, but there was a tension in the quiet, a heaviness, until the envelope came. Cream-colored, state letterhead, inside a single page. We had been approved for a conditional wildlife ambassador permit. We would undergo a mentorship period, attend training sessions, host educational programming once per quarter, and Maple would remain with us as long as she showed no signs of aggression and remained integrated into our care plan. Miles read it twice before speaking. "She stays." "She stays," I said. He sat down on the porch step and cried. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't about following every rule. It's about fighting through the ones that don't yet understand why something matters. We didn't hide. We didn't plead. We just told the truth again and again. And eventually someone listened. There's a false belief that wild animals belong on one side of the line and people on the other. But in every rescue there's a meeting point. A moment where trust is given, not taken. Maple wasn't just a bobcat in a house. She was a story that made strangers remember what softness looks like. And in a world that forgets too easily sometimes, that's the most urgent rescue of all. The next week, we hosted our first official workshop. We called it Stories That Walk In on 4 Paws. Kids from the local school came, so did a few senior center guests. One man rolled in a wheelchair holding a photo of his late dog. A girl brought a stuffed animal and told everyone it was rescued too. We didn't teach technique, just told stories, showed sketches, let Maple wander freely, always within sight, always near the windows, always close enough for people to feel wonder. At the end, we passed out small cards that said, "What's your ripple if you could fight for one thing quietly, fully, with your whole heart? What would it be?" We thought that would be the peak, the moment where the arc settles. The storm clears, but ripples don't end at the edge of the pond. Because when the mayor came to thank us, she brought an offer we hadn't imagined. Would you like to take Maple's story on the road? And suddenly the studio wasn't just a place anymore, it was a movement. The offer came on a warm April morning when the air in Sagebrush Hollow smelled like lilac and melted snow. The mayor showed up in jeans and a windbreaker, holding a thermos in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. She didn't waste time with formalities. "We're putting together a spring festival," she said. "Music, food trucks, kids' activities. But we want more than just booths. We want stories. We want heart." She handed me the paper, an invitation to be the festival's featured community booth. "Maple's Gallery," she said with a smile. "Think you're up for it?" I looked at Miles, who was holding a sketch of Maple in a superhero cape, and at Jenna, who had just painted a sign that read, "Kindness looks like this," in soft blues and greens. "We'll need a bigger folding table," I said. Preparation began the next day. Miles designed bookmarks with Maple curled inside a stack of books. Jenna started painting a banner. Maple standing in a field of wildflowers, ears perked, tail curled, looking both wild and safe. I built a portable art rack out of reclaimed fence boards, my hands moving more confidently than they had in years. And Maple, she supervised, mostly from sunny spots, sometimes from someone's lap, occasionally from the roof of the fridge. She knew something was happening. She always did. The day of the festival, we arrived early. The town green was already buzzing, children racing between booths, dogs wagging their tails, someone tuning a guitar near the gazebo. We set up under a poplar tree, hung the banner between two tent poles, spread out sketches, cards, prints, letters, and Maple's storybooks across the table, taped a new sign to the front that said, "Meet the wildcat who brought a town together." By noon, we were surrounded. Kids came first, wide-eyed, giggling, pointing at Maple's paw prints stamped in the corner of each page. Then came teachers, neighbors, folks who had followed the story from the start. People who'd left notes on our porch. Some who'd never said a word until now. A woman in her 60s stood at the edge of the booth for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. "My granddaughter loved your Bobcat comic," she said. She drew one of her own. It's the first time she's drawn anything since her dad left. She handed Miles a copy. A bobcat in a princess gown holding a light. We framed it that night. In Wisconsin, a retired art teacher initiated a project called Fur and Feelings, which allowed children grieving the loss of pets to draw memories of their animals and write letters to them. The program went viral, and eventually the town hosted an annual Kindness Through Animals fair. What began as grief transformed into connection because shared tenderness has a way of multiplying. Back at the festival, a boy around 10 stopped in front of our table. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at Maple, who was perched behind the display like royalty. Then he turned to his mom and said, "I want to do this. I want to help animals." Miles gave him a blank sketchbook and said, "Then you already have." People stayed, not to shop, but to linger. Some read the letters, others asked about the original note, the one that came tied around Maple's neck with $40 and no name. We had it laminated now, kept in a wooden frame, a reminder that sometimes a desperate act of kindness becomes the start of everything. Later that afternoon, a woman approached with a small box in her arms. Inside was a folded quilt, each square stitched with an animal. Cats, dogs, birds, even one that looked suspiciously like a raccoon in a scarf. "I made this for you," she said, voice trembling. "You reminded me that not all stories have to end in loss." We hung it on the back wall of the booth. It stayed there until the sun dipped behind the trees. A lesson from that day. When you give people space to care, they don't just fill it, they expand it. We didn't set out to become anything official. We just opened a door, hung a few drawings, told the truth in soft, steady ways. And in return, the town showed up not just to support, but to become part of the story. In the weeks that followed, requests poured in. The local school asked if Miles could lead an art session during their Earth Week. The bakery asked Jenna to paint a mural of Maple above the coffee bar. The town newsletter ran a piece titled, "How a Bobcat, a Boy, and a Shed Became the Heart of Sagebrush Hollow." Maple's Gallery became more than a studio. It became a place people referred to in conversations like it had always existed. You know, down by the gallery, next to where the Bobcat lives. Like it had always been part of the map. And maybe it had. We just hadn't noticed until the door was open. We often think of towns as places of routine, habit, familiar faces and small talk, but a town is also a living thing. It aches. It remembers. It grows in quiet places. And sometimes all it takes is one wildcat with a ribbon to stir something ancient and good. One morning, a letter arrived from a nearby shelter. It read, "Your story inspired 3 adoptions this month." People came in asking for a maple of their own. They attached photos, families with new rescue animals, each cradling them like treasure. One cat wore a tiny green ribbon around its neck. Jenna wiped her cheek when she saw it. By summer, we'd hosted 3 gallery nights. People shared poems, read letters, and performed small acoustic songs about the animals they'd loved and lost. One elderly man read a piece about the hound dog he'd grown up with during the war. When he finished, he said, "I didn't think this town had room for this kind of remembering." I told him it always did. We just needed to clear a spot. If you could create one space where people could show up as they are, with their love, their grief, their stories, what would it look like? One night, after a long day of framing new artwork and organizing letters for the gallery wall, Miles found another box on the porch. Inside was a red string tied in a bow and a kitten with bright blue eyes. No note, no money, just a soft meow. He looked up at me and said, "Looks like someone else needed a soft place to land." And just like that, we knew the story wasn't over. It was about to begin again. The final letter didn't arrive with fanfare. No box, no ribbon, just a plain white envelope, slightly creased, slid through the mail slot one rainy Tuesday morning. Maple was curled up on the window bench, watching raindrops crawl down the glass. Miles picked up the envelope, flipped it once in his hands, then handed it to me without a word. Inside was a single page, typed simple. "Dear gallery team, I'm 16. I live in a foster home now, and I'm trying to make better choices. One day I read your story about a wild cat baby who brought people together. I thought it was just another cute animal video, but it wasn't. It made me believe in people again. I drew my first picture that night. I'm still drawing. Thank you for keeping the porch light on for people like me." No name given. Miles stared out the window. "That's the last wall space," he said. "We're out." He wasn't wrong. The Hope Wall. Once. Just a single cork board, now stretched across 3 walls of the studio filled with letters, photos, crayon sketches, postcards from shelters, and stories of rescued wild animals, baby bobcats, stray dogs, and quiet kindnesses passed from hand to hand. We found a spot, taped the letter next to the very first one, Maple's, then we stood there in silence. That moment was a kind of arrival, not an ending, but the pause that happens right before something shifts, like a breath before a door opens. That same week, Jenna completed a mural across the studio ceiling, a giant tree stretching its limbs across beams and rafters. On the branches, she painted birds with ribbons in their beaks, stars with names written inside them, and at the center, Maple sleeping peacefully under a soft light, a paintbrush tucked under one paw. Miles added a small quote in block letters near the base. "This isn't where it ends. It's where it grows." A few days later, during a quiet afternoon when the rain had finally lifted, the town librarian stopped by. "We're planning a new wing," she said. "A space for children's programs and art. We'd like to name it after Maple." I looked at Jenna. She looked at Miles. No one spoke for a beat. Then Miles nodded. "She'd like that," he said. In a town in Oregon, a local shelter launched a community arts program after a rescue kitten named Lucky became a viral sensation. Children came to draw, teens came to heal. Adults came to reconnect. The room where it all happened, painted with paw prints and letters. They called it Lucky's Corner. It still stands today. That night we held an impromptu porch gathering. Neighbors brought tea and folding chairs. Someone baked lemon cookies. Miles passed around sketch pads for anyone who wanted to draw. Jenna laid out a long roll of butcher paper across the porch railing with crayons and markers beside it. We didn't set rules, we just asked, "What has kindness meant to you?" By sunset, the paper was filled, drawings of pets, notes to lost animals, messages to strangers who had helped at just the right time. A child's handwriting stood out near the bottom maple, made our town warm again. We don't need to be extraordinary to create change. We just need to be consistent. Show up, listen, hold the door open, leave the light on. The next morning, I found Miles in the studio finishing a painting. It was Maple sitting on a hill at twilight watching the town below, but in the distance, tiny flickers of light stretched outward, each one a porch, each one glowing. "She lit the first one," he said, "but now look." He turned to me, brush still in hand. "We should do more. More places, more stories, not just here." He unrolled a map, pinned it to the far wall. "We'll call it the Porch Light Project," Jenna added. We didn't need a business plan, just a reason, and Maple had already given us that. Over the next few months, we traveled small towns, libraries, animal rescues, and community centers. Not with a grand mission, just with prints, cards, letters, and one question: who do you still believe in? At each stop, people answered in drawings, letters, and whispers. Some brought their own animals, rescued bobcats, stray dogs, cats they'd found under porches or behind stores. One woman introduced us to her three-legged squirrel named Buttons. And everywhere we went, the same pattern. People came in quietly. They left with their shoulders higher. They didn't come for cute animal videos, even though Maple had been that once. They came because they were looking for something, a reminder that animals love you back even in small moments. They came for stories of animal rescue, of wild cat babies who survived, of people who chose to care when it wasn't convenient. They came for hope. One stop stands out. In a small shelter in Vermont, a boy named Owen brought us a baby bobcat named Luna. She'd been found abandoned, wrapped in a flannel shirt with a note. "Please don't give up on her. She reminds me of Maple," Owen said. We handed him a print, one of Maple sitting beside a lantern. He traced the edge of the page with one finger. "She's still helping," he whispered. Back home, the Porch Light Project grew. We created an online gallery where people could post their rescue stories and art. Letters continued to arrive, one from an older man in Kansas who said Maple's story helped him adopt a cat after his wife passed. Another from a 14-year-old girl who had been self-harming but now channeled her pain into drawing rescue animals. We pinned them all, read them aloud during open gallery nights. And we always ended with this line: "The porch light's still on. It's waiting for you." One snowy night, Jenna brought out a new sign for the studio's front step. It read, "This isn't a gallery, it's a welcome mat." Maple had passed quietly by then, peacefully, at the foot of the window she loved. But her name, her light, it was everywhere. We live in a world that often asks us to protect our hearts, to brace against the next hurt. But Maple reminded us that some things wild, unexpected, delicate are still worth believing in. A kitten with a ribbon and $40 changed one man's life. And that story became another story. And another. Until it became yours. Now it's your turn. Think about your porch, real or metaphorical. Who's waiting outside it? What kindness is asking to come in? It may be a wild animal rescue in your area. It may be someone at school who's always sitting alone. It may be you needing to be reminded that second chances are real. That rescue goes both ways. If Maple's story stirred something in you, share this video. Leave us a comment about a moment you chose to care, or when someone cared for you. And if you believe in kindness that keeps the porch light on, click like. Subscribe, because we're not done telling stories, and we'd love to tell yours next.